Well, I just have to say, as a filmmaker and documentarian and science enthusiast, Apollo 11 may be like the perfect movie. So can you tell me why you were interested in doing the follow-up for Quarantine?
Those are kind words. Thanks, Lucas. Yeah, I think like a lot of filmmakers, probably yourself included, experienced the pandemic. Really shut us down for our next project following Apollo 11. And we were in the process of delivering a lot of materials back into the National Archives to be back into the public domain, and also NASA. And in reviewing a lot of those materials, I was going through the quarantine procedures that the astronauts went through following their return to Earth. And it really started as a procedural. Let's understand exactly what these procedures were. The minute you saw, the guys in their biological isolation garments, their masks, the care that NASA took to put these guys into quarantine, and then to build a lunar receiving laboratory back in Houston to house them and the support crew, and also all the lunar material that came back with them, and the spacecraft, the command service module. So it was just a really interesting thing to work on. And then as last year kind of dragged out, it really became more than just going through the procedures of quarantine. We had the racial justice movement that was happening over the summer, and then leading up to the election, a lot of the imagery that we were working with paralleled, a lot of the current events that were going on. So something that became just a quick little, 5-minute little thing that was a byproduct of the pandemic back in the spring, kind of took on a life of its own. And it was nice to get the team back too, that had worked on Apollo 11. It was nice to see people. We were all working remotely, but and it was kind of good to test out those workflows too, to see if we could, make it work. And now, luckily enough, Neon and CNN Films and IMAX, got together on the distribution end, so we get to share a little slice of history with audiences.
We've been seeing the quarantine procedures instituted to protect us from any harmful life from the moon and to protect any piece of life that might exist from being destroyed by our contamination.
Yeah, it's impressive work. So you had access to NASA's archives. Like, how much footage did you have to look through, and how did you approach that daunting task?
Well, initially, we got everything related to Apollo 11. That was back, several years ago. So a lot of the quarantine procedures themselves, I just kind of put in a side bin because that wasn't really our focus, with the feature film that we did. But then, and a lot of it had to do with just because there wasn't a whole lot of documentation too as to the actual quarantine procedures. So much like we tried to kind of work the jigsaw puzzle of what things happened on what day during the actual mission of Apollo 11, we started again with the quarantine film. What actually happened when? And there was a lot of historical inaccuracies. For instance, the rock boxes sometimes were labeled incorrectly. They were actually the film canisters, or the Hasselblad imagery. So it became kind of a historical revisionist project to kind of connect the dots as to how that stuff flowed into the lunar receiving laboratory, where it all went, and then who was responsible for what. And through that, if you watch the film enough times, you kind of start picking up, the people and the stories. John Hirosaki, who was Asian American, was embedded with the astronauts in the mobile quarantine facility, which was like a fancy Winnebago. And he had an incredible story. He was, this engineer that basically drew the shortest straw to, when he volunteered to do that, and was in there with, a surgeon. And the two of them were embedded with these guys that had just gone to the moon for the first time in a, pile of rocks, which is pretty amazing. So, and then to stay throughout that entire month that they were in Houston in quarantine as well with those guys, and also conducting science and everything, which, as we saw, has the word science, for some odd reason, has become a a bad word, it seems like. So I hope that this film reinforces that whole importance of what science can do, and following procedures for the betterment of all. That's kind of the message of the film.
Yeah, one of the reasons I love your work is because the style is very present. The choices you make. There's no narrator. You use split screens at times to like really show the action of what's happening. There's archival footage mixed with graphics and animation. So why did you decide to do this approach?
For me personally, it's just an aesthetic that I enjoy. It's kind of a throwback to the large format films from the 50s and the early 60s, and then what would become IMAX in the 70s. I like to experience cinema. It's such a young medium. I mean, it's only been around 120 plus years. So there's so much to the to the form of it that could be experimented with. And I think for this film, dealing with archival materials, one way in which to bring it to life is to just let people experience it. And of course, it doesn't help that we had access to 65 millimeter. I mean, it automatically forces you to be right there. But also, space, they're always at the cutting edge of technology. So the quality of the imagery is phenomenal. And I always thought that it hadn't been really taken advantage of. I mean, the still photography that the Apollo astronauts did is just unbelievable. You can go to some of the best museums in the world and see them printed out, on these huge, panoramic walls, and it still holds up today, 50 plus years later.
I mean, I'm really excited to watch not only Quarantine, but then also the original Apollo 11 doc in IMAX. I mean, I feel like watching it at home on my laptop with a decent speaker was pleasurable, but I knew what I was missing. So can you describe when can we see this in IMAX, and what are your thoughts on the different experiences from desktop and, IMAX theater?
Well, we spent a long time testing on IMAX screens when we initially did the film, working with people that were there, the astronauts, their families, people that were part of it. So I encourage everyone to see it on the biggest screen you possibly can. And it'll be out this Friday. We're going to be showing the short film, which is about 23 minutes first, and then the feature, Apollo 11. But that entire process, what they do is IMAX. They have a secret sauce that they put on it, and they take what our work is in the traditional theater space, and then they, IMAX-ize it. And we spent a lot of time, working with them to make sure everything was right. You're dealing with, 12 plus channels of sound too. So it's just an immersive, experience. And I encourage everybody to see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, working in documentary, I kind of know the ins and outs of the special sauce stuff. So one of the most impressive things about your filmmaking was the score and sound design, which it's hyper aware that those are like, really helping create the awe that you get when watching them. So can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's an underused tool, in the filmmakers, box of tools. It's my sound designer, Eric Milano. It really comes down to a collaborative effort, and I'm lucky enough to work with really great people. So Eric and I have worked a long time together. He knows my music composer, Matt Morton, really well. Matt's my longest running collaborator. We've known each other since we were kids. I'm just lucky enough that Matt is just an amazing composer that's willing to take risks too, for both the short and also Apollo 11. He went out and got a Moog synthesizer.
Nice.
He's a guitar brat, he plays a lot of instruments and everything, but he knew nothing about, a Moog. So playing a 1968 reissued Moog synthesizer was a bit of a risk at first, but it paid off just because he is who he is, and he's such a gifted artist. So but it's great to work with those guys, but I feel like in documentary in particular, sound design is very underutilized. You know, you want to put people right there, and 9 times out of 10, you're not dealing with the best footage in the world. And sound design and score is one way to, you know, to up your, you know, your showmanship and your skill set as a filmmaker, for sure.